Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
There is this old worn out joke about how the presidency of the USA is too serious a job to be left just to American voters. But it will be left to American voters only. Frankly, we should have asked that question before they elected Donald Trump. But now they have also fired Donald Trump because they have not given him a second term, which is rare. So Donald Trump is out, Joe Biden's coming in, and by this time we know the key members of his cabinet team. Now, why should we bother in India about American cabinet? Do we bother about, say, British cabinet, except to the extent that who are the people of Indian origin there and where they come from? Not really, but America is important, and I'll tell you why. America is important at any point of time because it is the preeminent power in the world anyway. Second, this is a time when 3 decades after the end of the Cold War, the preeminence of that power, America, is now challenged by a deputy superpower, but a rising deputy superpower, China. That deputy superpower has been rising just as the preeminent superpower has been declining under Trump. Why? Because Trump has been pulling it back within its own shell into like a continent-sized island, Atmanirbharta of a kind. So he's pulled America away. He also broke a lot of American alliances which balance the world and which would balance China now as they used to balance the Warsaw Pact countries in the past. So he's been tough with them. Now that's changing. American people didn't like it. So they now have a new president, Joe Biden. So the team that he has is of great importance to India as well. And it's important for us to understand who these people are, where they are coming from, ideologically, politically, by way of experience, philosophically, and also, most importantly, strategically. So there is a large cabinet, not as large as India's, and we don't need to talk about all of those, that will take too long, but there are 3 or 4 positions that really matter to India: Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense, Head of National Intelligence, Director National Intelligence, Director of CIA, and the Head of Homeland Security, which is like our Home Minister, and also the Head of the Head of Treasury. Now, Head of Treasury in America means like the Finance Minister, because we are also part of the global financial system now, and what happens in America, what approach America takes, matters to all of us. Now, when you look at these positions, barring one position, that is Director CIA, all names have now been put forward by Joe Biden. All these are subject to congressional clearance. Unlikely that these will be stopped, barring maybe one, but that is not a person who's really at the top of this list. That is Neera Tanden of Indian origin. Now, the most important from India's point of view is Secretary of State, that is Antony Blinken. Now, Antony Blinken is somebody that India and Indian officials and Indian side knows very well, because the good thing with the American system is that while with the change of presidency, there is a wholesale change of officials. Very often, there is continuity between the previous presidency of the same party and the new presidency of this party. So you will find many Obama faces in Biden administration. In fact, if anything, there is disaffection now, and there is a lot of complaint in Biden's own election team. And I read this in the American media. There's a lot of kutter-putter going on there, people saying that, look, we worked so hard to get Biden into power, and he's giving all the plum jobs to Obama's people. So what did we work for? This happens in many teams, but this team is very dominated by Obama people, and Obama's 2 presidencies, as we know, were very friendly to India, as was Clinton's 2nd presidency. So 3 Democratic administrations were quite friendly to India, and many of these officials have worked in both those administrations. So that is the key thing. Now, Antony Blinken is one of those. Antony Blinken in this team is also the most different from his predecessor. His predecessor was Mike Pompeo, who we know well, who's recently visited India and said rude things about China. Unlikely that Antony Blinken will say flattering things about China, but he's much more of a diplomat, much more of an internationalist. Pompeo, on the other hand, was much more of a domestic politician, a former soldier, a topper at West Point, which is something that Donald Trump always talks about. But again, somebody who had grown in the American domestic politics. Antony Blinken, on the other hand, is a genuine internationalist, and he's a genuine internationalist with a well-known view on most important issues in the world. And what are these important issues? There is China. So he is tough on China. He is not for decoupling America with China totally as his predecessor might have been, or as Trump might have demanded. He wants engagement with China, but he wants to be tough with China. He, in fact, wants America to further strengthen Taiwan's defense or Taiwan's security. He's also spoken strongly on China's activism or dadagiri at the line of actual control with India, as also China's use of trade and economic measures for leverage in its global strategic policy. I would say that applies much more to Australia than to any other country right now, because China is now squashing Australia by stopping imports from it. China accounts for 1/3 of Australia's exports. So he has clarity on China. Importantly, he also has strong views on India, and he is quite clear that India is a vital ally. America needs to engage with it, but at the same time, his view on some of the internal changes in India may not be the same as that of his predecessor, nor would this be the case, say, with Biden administration in general compared to the Trump administration. So because he's been part of the Democratic campaign also, and because in America there are lobbies and groups, it's perfectly legal there and perfectly regular. So many of the lobbies and groups have been reaching out to him, including the group of Muslims of Indian origin in America, drawing his attention to many things that have happened, especially CAA and NRC and protests by Muslims and insecurities by Muslims. And he's been listening to them. Similarly, on Article 370, on the situation in Kashmir as well. So it's likely that he will engage with India on those issues. He will not be as silent as, say, the Trump administration. Good thing or bad thing depends on how government of India wants to deal with it. All I can do at this point is, by way of decluttering, is read out a quote from him, from Antony Blinken himself. And it's a long quote, but please listen to it and listen to his words very carefully. He says, "Now you are right. We obviously have challenges now and real concerns. For example, about some of the actions government has taken, particularly in cracking down on freedom of movement and freedom of speech in Kashmir, some of the laws on citizenship." So that is 370, Kashmir, detentions, CAA, NRC, all that is encompassed in this one sentence. Then he says, "But you are always better off engaging with a partner, and a vitally important one like India, where you can speak frankly and directly." And our experience has been that is the best way of taking things forward with friends and allies. So again, he's not somebody who's going into any confrontation or any shift in policy. In fact, that is pretty much like Biden's view as well. Biden, for example, was personally critical of India when the nuclear tests took place, and he expressed his disappointment, but even in that statement, he expressed very serious disappointment. In conclusion, he said, but India is still much too important for us to be at odds with. He also then campaigned to get sanctions against India softened. So this lot understands the importance of India, but they will not be as indifferent as, say, the Trump administration was about many of these internal issues in India. So maybe India will have to rethink its policy. Either India can decide to forget it, which may be challenging at this point, because at this point India has an immediate strategic challenge also from the Chinese. So there is self-interest involved. So if India wants to ignore the Americans as the Chinese ignore them on Uyghur. I don't think that luxury will be available right now. Of course, nothing is barred. You can always go that way. But I think India's approach, Modi government's approach of this exclusionism from the world and this sort of surly thin-skinnedness about a statement by Trudeau or about somebody, that will have to change a little bit, or they will have to endure some of these pinpricks from America. But in a sense, I see him only taking the relationship forward. If you look at some of the other very important issues that he's spoken about, look at Iran. Now, he's somebody who is committed to JCPOA. That is the agreement that the previous administration, Obama administration, had with Iran for Iran to block its uranium enrichment or its nuclear weapons program in return for the lifting of sanctions. Trump did not want it. He thought this was wrong. From day one, he was committed to withdrawing it. He immediately withdrew it and formalized that withdrawal in his last months. I suspect, looking at Blinken's record, that he will go and re-engage with Iran, and you might see some changes there, which is actually net very good for India, because Iran is a neighboring country. India does not want Iran isolated. Iran is also friendly to India. India balances its relations in the Islamic world. Also, this kind of heavy sanctions against Iran has barred India from buying oil from there. At the same time, India's exports to Iran have suffered, and Chinese influence in Iran is growing. So, in all those matters, this is positive for India. Then look at some of his views on other key issues, especially in the Middle East. Now, in some of our earlier Cut the Clutters, we've described Obama's foreign policy approach, particularly in the Middle East, as leading from behind, that I will not put anything in front, I will pull strings from behind and I'll let people do what they are doing. Now, if you look at Blinken's interviews and Blinken's statements, you can see that he disagreed with some of those positions. For example, he disagreed with Obama's idea of not intervening more actively in Syria. And he thinks that that has led to the disaster in Syria, and frankly then also ISIS, etc., because it's only after these territories became completely anarchic that ISIS was able to find a geographical location for itself. So there is a quote from him. He says, "We failed to prevent a horrific loss of life in Syria. We failed to prevent a horrific loss of life. We failed to prevent massive displacement, something which I will take with me for the rest of my life." So you can expect some changes there. Then I presume that he and Biden have some agreement on this. Then he was also signatory to an open letter criticizing American open support to the Saudis in their war in Yemen. He is opposed to that. So once again, you will find that this will not go as smoothly as you might have thought. He has a strong liberal streak. His stepfather was a survivor of concentration camps, Auschwitz and Dachau, both. So he has those recollections and he has that personal and institutional memory. So expect him to be more forthcoming on issues of human rights, etc. That is something that Trump didn't bother about. In fact, any time Trump saw human rights being trampled here and there, except lately in China with the Uyghurs, I think he would have thought, oh, those guys are lucky. Gee, they have all these special powers I don't in my country. But this administration will be different. Now on national security, and this is something that we all keep talking about. Who's a hawk, who's a dove? And every time this happens, I remember the line that Natwar Singh used once when he was External Affairs Minister of India. When somebody asked him, are you a hawk or a dove? He said, am I running a foreign ministry or a bird sanctuary? Good point. So in which box do you put Blinken? So I can tell you, he was Deputy Secretary of State under Obama. Look at the picture of Obama's control room or his operations room when he and his key people are watching the killing of Osama bin Laden. When you see that group photo, one of those faces is also Antony Blinken's. So he is very much part of that tough American establishment. There is no real change with that. Now, there is something else that may not be that material at this point, particularly for India, but Brexit. He's also known to be somebody who really was unhappy with Brexit. And there is an October podcast where he was quoted as having said that Brexit was a bit like a dog caught a car. You've seen dogs chasing cars. When a car passes by, dogs chase it. Usually they chase it to some distance. When they catch up with the car, they come back because somehow the dogs are smart. They convince themselves कि मेरे से डर के भाग गया. So he was scared of me, he ran away. But he says this is a case where it looks like the dog caught a car, but the car stopped and reversed and ran over the dog. I don't think he's going to be able to change the Brexit situation very much, but he's also very much a Europeanist. He's dealt with the Europeans, and you expect him to stitch back America's alliances in Europe, which under Trump had become deeply frayed. You also see him focusing strongly on Indo-Pacific. He understands its primacy, and this comes out from his writings and speeches, and also gives India a very high priority. Now, the next one that matters to India is the National Security Advisor. That is Jake Sullivan. You know how old is he? 43. Think. In India, nobody becomes an NSA unless you've retired and frankly spent some time usually spent some time after retirement. India has never had a non-retired NSA, but America is a different system, and maybe it also balances the average age in the cabinet given how old Biden is, 78. So the NSA is Jake Sullivan, who's 43 years old. He is also a former Iran deal negotiator. He's not only an Iran deal negotiator, you can see that he's somebody who is into conflict resolution. So Iran deal he negotiated. He also played a key role in the peace deal in the Gaza in 2012. He also understands the importance of Indo-Pacific in rebalancing the world, and he comes lately from Carnegie Endowment, which has a very strong South Asian, India, Pakistan and China element as well. So he's come and he's very current with his knowledge. He's also committed to JCPOA. So once again, important for Iran, positive for Iran is positive for India at this point. Also generally positive for India, again somebody that many people know on the Indian side. There's another very familiar face in India now in the Biden team, although he's not on the main strategic foreign policy side, which used to be his forte earlier. That is John Kerry, former Secretary of State. Now he is now Biden's ambassador for climate change. So his job mainly is to put the Paris climate deal back on the rails, because Donald Trump had pulled America out of it. So he's now going to go back. 195 countries had signed it, including America. But Trump said this was very unjust to America. Now that was a setback to countries like India as well, because the reward that countries like India were to get for becoming compliant with new requirements of Paris peace deal were very, very important for India, because India is switching heavily to unconventional sources of energy. So this will be a positive for India. Now there's a little twist there that John Kerry, although he'll be reporting directly to the president, he has cabinet rank, but he'll be sitting in the State Department. His office will be in the State Department. It just so happens that Antony Blinken, who's now Secretary of State, used to work as a deputy to as a junior to John Kerry when he was Secretary of State. But that's what politics is all about. That's how things happen in real life. Now there's another key person that we know the least about, and that is General Lloyd Austin III. He will be America's Secretary of Defense. So he'll head the Pentagon, a black, which is very unusual in American political history. We had Colin Powell in the past as a top cabinet official. Now we have General Lloyd Austin. He is not that well known in India because he's not been a military diplomat in the past, and he's not served, say, directly in Afghanistan or somewhere around here. But he has been the commander. His last position was the commander of CENTCOM. Central Command. Now that looks at the entire Islamic Middle Eastern region. So he knows that region very well. He's been in Iraq. Does not have such a lot of familiarity with Indo-Pacific or with China, which may be a good thing or a bad thing. Sometimes it can be a good thing that you have background knowledge. Sometimes it can be a bad thing because you may come with preconceived notions. But he is a surprise appointment. One question about his appointment, he does not check one box, and that is he has not yet been retired for 7 years. Now, in the US, they set up a principle in late 40s when they created the position of Secretary of Defense that nobody should get a position like that, no retired officer, until you've been retired for 7 years. So there's a 7-year cooling period. General Austin retired in 2016, so he's only spent 4 years, so he will have to go to the Congress for a special waiver in this case. That waiver has been given in the past, but only twice in the past. Once though was fairly recent, that was General Jim Mattis, who was Trump's appointee. So if that could happen, most likely this will happen as well. Now there are many other appointees that we'll not talk about in detail, but I'll mention Janet Yellen, who's Secretary of the Treasury, Finance Minister, in a way, again a scholar, an economist, a labor economist, labor wage economist of enormous eminence, and also somebody whose husband is an economist, Ekerlof, in fact, not just an economist, but also a Nobel laureate. In fact, he got the Nobel laureate jointly with Joe Stiglitz, who's known very well in India. In 1993, he wrote a famous paper with Paul Romer, who later got a Nobel. The paper was called Looting the Economic Underworld of Bankruptcy for Profit in America. And Janet Yellen is known to be a balancer. So it looks like she will bring about the balance between the left and the right and the center, and the markets are happy with that appointment. You can see with the way the markets have responded. Now, before we go away, we'll talk about, there are many people of Indian origin in the new Biden administration. It's also very diverse. There are two key positions, for example, with Latinos as well. Among these is a very interesting appointment, that is Neera Tandon. Now, Neera Tandon, she spells T-A-N-D-E-N. Neera Tandon is Director of the Office of Management and Budget. So she becomes the senior most official of Indian origin in Biden administration after Kamala Harris, of course. Now, she has a very interesting background. She was brought up by a single mother. She was brought up on food stamps, rented housing, state support early on. So very self-made to that extent, and a fellow traveler with Hillary Clinton, and then onwards with other Democrats, but not really the extreme left. And she earned fame or infamy or notoriety at one point in 2008 when a man called Faiz Shakir, a Democrat, raised an inconvenient question about the war in the Gulf with Hillary Clinton, and she got angry, so angry that she punched him. She now says she only pushed him, she did not punch him. So she built quite a tough reputation. She's also somebody who will have the toughest time now passing the congressional approval for her nomination, because Republicans really dislike her. Senator John Cornyn, who's a Republican, has actually called her radioactive. So Republicans have an allergy to her. Senator Lindsey Graham, the friend of Pakistan's, calls her a nut job, and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell also must carry some personal hurt also about her, because she had once called him Moscow Mitch, whatever that means. You call Mitch McConnell Moscow Mitch. You draw your own conclusions. And she is also somebody, and I'm just mentioning it as a passing note, also somebody who, as soon as her appointment was announced, deleted 1,000 of her old tweets. But anything that was deleted in the past can be brought back.